One of my biggest disappointments is when a game lacks enemy variety. I lose a lot of motivation to keep playing when after a certain point I'm going up against recolored enemies and recycled bosses. I've come to expect it in most games, but Hollow Knight Silksong hasn't disappointed me yet and I'm like 40 hours in. Instead, its enemy variety routinely impresses me as I continue on my way to 100% completion. Maybe help me out in the comments here. I can't really think of another game with so many unique foes to best that not only tie directly into the world building, bringing the immersiveness of the game as a whole up another notch, but also elevate the rather simple and oftentimes tedious combat by introducing new bugs to squish constantly without reusing ones from other areas. I actually noticed this enemy variance as I was talking to some colleagues about the bosses that we had the most trouble with. One of them mentioned how helpful they found the injector band tool from White Ward that speeds up Hornet's healing ability. I was like, the what? Because I somehow completely missed that area of the Citadel despite grabbing and using the white key to access the elevator to it at some point. I must have doubled back for some reason and forgot about it. I, of course, hopped on the Bellway to take a stroll down there and marveled at how this small, spooky surgical ward introduced 3 new enemies with their own spooky movesets and a thematically appropriate boss. Conditioned by other games, I wouldn't have been surprised to find some choir knights from the choral chambers rather than wispy bandage bro, Edward Scissorbugs, and these cartwheeling assholes. And that's without mentioning this unique boss, the Unraveled. Sure, it only has 2 attacks, rush forward and throw dead bugs, but its arena also spawns foes and has some spooky spears to dodge, making for an interesting if not the most memorable fight. Point is, this small area I didn't even know existed 40 hours in housed within it several enemies I'd never seen before and really hammered home how Silksong spoils us with new foes at every turn. I mean, Bilewater and the Putrefied Ducks are connected on the map but have their very own poisonous fly to deal with, and one is a lot worse than the other. Speaking of Bilewater, thanks for the amazing support, the likes, the new subscribers, and the massive amount of comments on my Bilewater video. It means a lot for my small channel. Anyway, I think the only reused enemies were those related to the wishes like a rematch against everyone's favorite beastfly, the critters in the zoo-like memoriam, and then the pilgrims. But the pilgrims thematically make sense as the first act of Silksong is all about following their path up to the Citadel and seeing them taken over by silk threads along the way. Except for these guys in the far fields. What are they doing way out here? I have no idea, so I guess I'll wait for a YouTuber to put up a 2-hour video essay explaining how they got lost or whatever. On the other hand, these bone kangaroos are found only in this area between the Deep Docks and Hunter's March. Wild, right? Likewise, the massive 4th chorus boss fight down in the far fields occurs fairly early on in the game. Any other game would have reused that boss model several times throughout, but with slight variations. Maybe something like Pokemon is on the same level as Silksong because the whole experience is centered around the sheer variety of mons that you can catch and battle against. But even then, you'll see a lot of Pokemon repeated throughout any given adventure. 9 out of 10 members of Team Rocket recommend Zubat after all, yet this isn't the case in Silksong. In fact, outside of the Memoriam, you're always going up against new foes. Many of them seen only once, like these Steelkin with spears at the start of the Grohl the Great boss fight. Off the top of my head, recent Metroidvania either reuse enemies frequently or have a much smaller bestiary, while excelling in other ways. I can't remember a single standout enemy from Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown, for example, but I do fondly recall clever traversal abilities like the one that creates a copy of Sargon. I would have loved to see a more unique way for Hornet to get around like this, but that's a topic for another video, I think. Nine Souls is another good comparison. Here, the bosses are pretty unique, but the decently sized roster of regular enemies blurs together a little bit. Other than drawing from Chinese mythology and the game's sci-fi setting, they don't build much of the world or stand out much from each other. On the other hand, Nine Souls excels in kinetic, counter-based combat that puts Silksong's pogoing and tools to shame. This might be a stretch, but given Silksong's Souls-like inspirations, Elden Ring also serves as an interesting comparison as one of the largest games in recent memory with a massive bestiary. Elden Ring does, however, repeat quite a lot of foes and boss models the further you get in the lands between, and many were pulled from previous From Software games as well. I mean, one of the most prominent criticisms of Elden Ring is how most side dungeons have the same imp enemies within, and I personally stopped wanting to explore them for that reason. I don't begrudge From Software for this, as developing such a massive game requires compromises even with hundreds of members on the team, and it's obviously not a much more simple 2D Metroidvania, but I do want to emphasize the point that Silksong Silksong, even with its small team of like 3 people, has spoiled us here. As a result, Silksong's massive amount of enemies not only makes the straightforward combat much more engaging, it elevates how alive Farloom feels and makes me far more motivated to explore it. For example, only the Scar Ant enemies could have also resided in the far fields instead of these little guys called Furtids, and it wouldn't have taken too much away from the world building. Instead, having unique enemies brings this area to life, making it much more memorable. Thus, the enemy progression as you explore Farloom tells not only its own story but that of the world around it. The little beasts you first meet in Moss Grotto, Moss Home, and the Marrow obviously match the environments they inhabit, interspersed only with pilgrim bugs that have lost their minds on their way to the Citadel. These beasts tell a story of untamed wilds moving on when a society crumbles around it that directly juxtaposes the Citadel itself. The barbaric scar of Hunter's March and the craws of Greymoor land somewhere in between. These initial beasts have simple attack patterns and pose little threat, which make the Scar warriors, wielding their weapons and armor taken from the beasts from the Marrow, the first wall of Silksong where many players struggle, though these bouncy flowers might have had something to do with that too. I don't think it's a coincidence that the environment and the Scar themselves are a bit prickly. Closer to the Citadel, the remains of more sophisticated cultures begin to show. Greymoor and Sinner's Road team with violent slavers, while hunters prowl alongside the beasts of the Shellwood. But as I mentioned before with my visit to White Ward, the Citadel itself impresses with several areas all distinct from one another with their own enemies within. While the choir enemies in the Coral Chambers are perhaps the most memorable, the Underworks impressed me the most. You probably noticed that the benches here require a handful of rosaries to activate, especially if you're like me and fell down here without any rosaries to spend. In turn, the enemies, all designed around cleaning up and maintaining the Underworks, drop very few rosaries upon defeat. They're skint, unappreciated slave cleaners. This is a level of both enemy variety and detail that I haven't often seen in other games and adds a lot to an area that in-universe is an afterthought of Grandmother Silk and the Weavers. As such, it stands out thematically far more than the Grand High Halls, for example. Truly, I think the enemy variety and how it ties into the world is Silksong's most impressive feat. I haven't even touched on how different all the bosses are. Again, most games would repeat them in some way, but we only see this happen a couple of times during wishes, which do seem like an afterthought if you consider all the other uniquely crafted aspects of Farloom. I think there's like 40 or more bosses, and a few of those I personally haven't even seen yet, even after playing for more than 40 hours. Pro tip, if you want to 100% complete Silksong quickly, don't have a 6-month-old daughter, and definitely don't stop playing to make videos like this one. Anyway, not only does the sheer number of unique foes set Silksong apart from other Metroidvania or contemporary games, it also elevates both the world building and straightforward combat. For me, this keeps my motivation high to continue exploring. I think I'm almost done, but I don't want to be when in some other games I just want to get the adventure over with when fighting reskins of enemies that are red instead of blue and deal fire damage or something. But this video has gone on long enough without asking you what you specifically think. How have you found the enemy variety in Silksong when compared to other games? Let me know in the comments. The last video I did on Bilewater has over 800 comments, with like a third of those being mine, as I try to reply as much as possible. I'm making these videos to start a conversation with you about the games we're both playing. And if you don't know who I am and what I'm about, my name is Lowell and I'm a freelance game critic, content creator, and guide writer based in Japan. You might have read my words on websites like Nintendo Life and PC Games N, or watched video guides of mine over at Gamer Guides. I'm actually covering the Tokyo Game Show for 2 of those 3 websites later this week, so keep an eye out for some words of mine. Anyway, when my daughter is a bit older, I plan on uploading to this channel far more frequently with narrative critiques, opinion pieces like this one, and more on the games I play for the various websites I freelance for. If that sounds good to you, maybe like and subscribe. Thanks, bye.